So we begin today a series of talks from the book of Exodus in the Old Testament. But it's not just that we're looking at the book, we're actually thinking about this thing called the Exodus. It's one of the great themes of the Old Testament. What does Exodus actually mean? It means a leaving, a departure, a going forward. And it's usually applied to a large group of people. That's what an exodus is. And the story that we have unfolded for us in the book of Exodus is a story of how God hears the cries of his people, the descendants of Jacob, who had been oppressed and enslaved by the king of Egypt. We hear of how God, through his chosen servant Moses, frees these people from slavery in Egypt to bring them to the land that God had promised to Abraham, the land of Canaan. It's the story of how along the way God forges this very diverse group of people known as the Hebrews into a nation. Through it all, this story actually points us forward to the Jesus story. The story of God's chosen one who leads people out of slavery to sin and who takes these people and forms them into his people, the church, and who leads this people into his kingdom. This is also a story that has resonance for us as we come out of lockdown, as we discover how to be church in this new context that we're moving into and that we'll be living through. So there's the setting for us. Let's begin the journey, the Exodus. And we begin at the beginning, with God selecting a man called Moses to be his chosen agent, to be sent on a dangerous mission. Moses, who was born a Hebrew, but raised as an Egyptian prince, who had fled from Egypt when he killed an Egyptian slave overseer who was beating a Hebrew slave. If the first third of Moses' life was a life of privilege in Egypt, the second third of his life was certainly no easy setting. It was one of hardship as he served as a shepherd. And we take up his story on the verge of this final third of his life as God reaches out to him to call him to the work for which the whole of his life previously had been a preparation. So this is where we take up the story. And the first thing that I want to note is that God called Moses into his holy presence. God grabbed Moses' attention through a burning bush that wasn't burning up. Yeah, that's certainly a way of grabbing attention. And it did, because Moses' curiosity was aroused. He stepped aside to take a look. He could have dismissed it, maybe just a figment of his imagination, and he could have carried on with his day, but he didn't. And because he didn't, his mission began. God wants our attention. Are you giving God your attention? Wonder what you're doing at this moment. Are you listening, or are you somewhere else? The question is, will we step aside from our everyday routines, from the overwhelming busyness that all of us have had to face in some shape or form, in order to investigate what God has in store? Think about it. Once God has Moses' attention, what God then does is call his name, Moses. You see, God knew Moses. God chooses him because he knew him. God knows you. And just as he knew what Moses was capable of, God knows what you are capable of. Take off your sandals, for the place you're standing is holy ground. God's first instruction to Moses was to worship, because God, in all of his holiness, was there. God wants Moses to realize that he is in the presence of the God who is the Holy One. Moses needed to know of the holiness of God right at the outset. The holiness of God was and is non-negotiable. God begins this relationship with an alert that he is other, he is different, he is distinct from anyone whom Moses had ever encountered before. What was true for Moses is true for us also. The starting point for going on a journey with God, for going on mission with God, needs to be our complete respect of who he is and what he is like. He is the Holy One, and he calls us to be in his presence. And then God introduces himself. He says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now, what's interesting here, I think, is that although Moses knew about God, the implication is that this is the first time he actually encountered God personally. And in this encounter was to be a life-changing experience. We are called to encounter this holy God. And we have the advantage over Moses. We have the revelation of God in Jesus, the risen one. But just as Moses met with God, God is constantly calling us into his presence to make real that relationship with him. Is God calling you this morning? The answer is yes. He's calling you to be in his holy presence. Second, as we start this journey of Exodus, God called Moses onto a mission. This revelation, this introduction of himself to Moses, has more than a let's hang out together aspect to it. God shares his thoughts and plans with Moses. That's amazing. But God does it. God tells Moses he's heard the cry of the Hebrew slaves, and God says he is going to rescue them. He's going to give them a productive and fertile land to live in, the land of Canaan. God was going to break the oppression, the chains that held the Hebrews and under which they were suffering at the hands of the Egyptians. Here is a statement of God's mission: freedom and justice for the weak and the vulnerable, an end to oppression, an end to slavery. All well and good. And then comes the punchline from God to Moses. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. This was the jaw-dropping moment. You see, this wasn't just a cozy chat because God wanted to share with someone what he was intending to do on his own. This was a mission briefing. And Moses was God's chosen agent to deliver the mission objectives, free the Hebrew slaves, and take them to the land of Canaan. God is still in the business of mission briefing with us. As we come into his holy presence, he's sharing with us what his mission objectives are for our particular time. And then he's saying to us, so now go, I'm sending you. Did you get that? God's saying to you, so now go, I am sending you. The story of Moses reminds us that we are called to be part of God's mission, to bring freedom and transformation to our world, to our community, to our workplaces, to our homes, to our families. And that involves working for social justice, seeing that no one goes hungry, doing the things like supporting the work of compassion in parts of the world where they don't have the advantages that we have, supporting the work of Tear Fund. His mission is also for freedom for Christian brothers and sisters. That's why the work of Open Doors is so important. Please, please, don't forget that work. We as a church support it. Are you supporting it? Are you praying for brothers and sisters who are suffering persecution for their faith? And God's mission also involves growing God's kingdom. How? By serving people in our own communities, the communities that we're all involved in, and helping people come to know Jesus as their Lord. Coming soon, we've got a training course that we're going to be running out midweek called Stepping Stones, that looks at how as church we can better do this, how we can better build God's kingdom. So God called Moses onto a mission, and he calls us onto mission. But the theme of this service was reluctance. And it's called Reluctance because Moses' response was a reluctant response. His instant reaction to all that God was briefing him about was not, wow, when do we start? I think it's fair to say that his response was lukewarm, hesitant, full of yes buts. He was reluctant. God called, and Moses tried his hardest to not get on board. The excuses came tumbling out. Does any of that sound familiar? First Moses said, who am I? You can't be serious, God. Surely you've got the wrong man. God's answer, I'll be with you. And when you've brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. It's going to happen. You and I together, Moses. Second, Moses said, who are you? Who do I tell the people has sent me? And God's answer was to reveal his name, that mysterious name, I am. Third, and we didn't read this morning, but third, Moses said, what if they don't believe me? God's answer was, here are some signs: a staff that can turn into a snake, a leprous hand when you put it into your tunic, and when you put it back in, it will become healed and whole again. Turning the Nile into blood. Here are some signs to show the people that I am with you. And fourth, Moses says, I'm not a good speaker. God's answer was he would send Moses' own brother Aaron along as his mouthpiece. Do you identify with Moses' reluctance to go on mission for God? God has the answers for you just as he did for Moses. Learn from Moses. Don't make excuses to avoid God's call. Moses eventually got on with it and became God's amazing agent, engaged in God's amazing mission. Will you too be a part of Mission Exodus? Moses, to begin with, focused on himself. He was afraid. He needed to remember that God said he was going to do this great thing. God said he was going to do it. We too need to get our eyes off ourselves and see what God is going to do and then join in with him. We need to activate faith over fear as we join in Mission Exodus.